3 nights after the first man was executed at his own front door, another body hit the pavement in another borough. Another skull opened by a single shot. Another man dead with his keys still in his hand while the killer walked away so calmly, no one on the block understood they had just watched murder leave the scene. Detective Geathers, tell them what kind of horror it becomes when the city realizes the first killing was not the event. It was the beginning.
The second man died with his front door in sight, blood pouring into the sidewalk, his body folding exactly the way the first one had. And by the time I reached him, the street had already gone quiet again, like the block itself had learned how to swallow murder without choking on it. That was the second scene. Another body dropped in darkness. Another man dead before he could cross the final few feet of his own routine. Another killing so clean, so controlled, and so grotesquely familiar that the first thing I felt was not surprise. It was recognition. That was the first real terror of the second murder. It did not shock me because it was new. It shocked me because it was not. 3 nights after the first body, another bar owner closed his doors, counted his register, stepped into the same private ritual men build for themselves after years of repetition, and died in the exact same stretch of borrowed certainty. Same hour, same walk, same final reach for the keys, same single shot, same silent swallowing the sound before anyone on the block understood what had happened. By the time I stepped onto that second street in Midtown, I was no longer looking at a murder scene. I was looking at a pattern, learning how to repeat itself. That is what repetition does to violence. It strips away the comfort of randomness. One killing can still be explained by rage, debt, history, some private ugliness between men that eventually finds its way into blood. But repetition changes the emotional temperature of a case. It tells you the first death was not an explosion. It was a test. And the second body tells you the test worked. He was on the pavement just like the first one, keys still in hand. Body turned toward the door, blood spreading black across the concrete, in the exact same shape grief had taken 3 nights earlier in Queens. There were no defensive wounds, no evidence he had turned, no raised hand, no instinctive attempt to shield himself. Just impact, immediate and final. A man alive in one breath and gone in the next. That kind of killing does not merely suggest control, it proves rehearsal. And once that thought enters the room, everything gets darker. Because men who kill in anger improvise. Men who kill like this do not. They arrive having already solved the moment in their head. They know where the victim will be standing. They know how the body will be positioned. They know what the silence will do after the shot. They understand not just how to kill, but how the city will behave once it has happened. That was what terrified me at the second scene. Not the blood, not the body. The certainty that someone had now done this twice, and had become more confident because of it. The witness statement made that certainty worse. Another person who did not know they were a witness. Another resident who heard something too strange to call a gunshot, and glanced out too late to see the act. Only the departure. Dark clothes, head lowered, hands at his sides. Same measured pace, same absence of urgency. He was not fleeing. He was leaving. That detail did not just repeat. It hardened. The killer had now walked away from 2 executions, as if the city belonged to him more than the men he had just killed in it.
So by the second body, Detective, this was no longer just a killing. It was a repetition with discipline, precision, and control. Did that make the case clearer? Or did it make what you were hunting even more disturbing?
It made it more disturbing because repetition creates the illusion of clarity, and that illusion can become the most dangerous thing in an investigation. 2 dead men, 2 bar owners, 2 nearly identical executions after closing. At first glance, it looked like the case was finally giving us what detectives are trained to want: structure. And structure is seductive. It gives you boundaries. It gives you logic. It gives you the false comfort of believing the violence can be explained by something familiar. 2 bar owners killed after closing means suppliers, debt, organized pressure, extortion, business rivalry. It gives you a world to work inside. And once a case gives you a world, it is very easy to mistake access for understanding. So we move fast into the shared architecture of both men's lives. Vendors, payroll, deliveries, renovation disputes, patron complaints, men banned from both establishments. The overlap came quickly enough to feel useful. One name surfaced almost immediately. A patron with a long history of alcohol-fueled violence, someone thrown out of both bars months apart, someone unstable enough to feel dangerous and angry enough to feel plausible. He was exactly the kind of suspect investigators are taught to notice first. History of escalation, public confrontations, known resentment, familiar face in both places. He had motive. He had access. He had the right kind of instability to let everyone in the room start building the case around him before he had even sat down. That was what made him dangerous. Not because he was our killer, because he was almost believable enough to become him. We brought him in, and for a few hours the case began arranging itself around him in ways that felt almost merciful. His temperament fit, his anger fit, his history fit. It was all just coherent enough to become dangerous, because the most destructive moment in an investigation is not when you have no theory. It is when you have one that wants very badly to be true. For a little while it held, then it broke. His alibi did not bend. It did not wobble under pressure. It did not collapse where we needed it to. It held clean, verified, supported, unshakable. Every assumption we had draped over him came off all at once, and when it did, the case did not collapse. The illusion did. That is the part people never see. The moment a case gives you direction and then takes it back, leaving you not just uncertain, but aware that uncertainty was the safer place to begin with. That was when I stopped looking at who the men were and went back to the one thing the scene had never stopped telling me. Timing. Both men were killed after closing. Both were taken in the exact same private collapse of attention. The moment the body shifts from alertness to ritual. The moment keys come out. The moment the door becomes the only thing in view. That was the real overlap. Not their profession, not their history, not their enemies, their predictability. That was when the case turned darker than motive.
So if it wasn't revenge, not business, not debt, and not some old grievance finally coming due, then what exactly were you looking at by the end of that second scene?
By the end of the second scene, I was no longer looking at two men who had been killed for who they were. I was looking at two men who had been killed for how precisely their lives could be timed. That is what made the second murder truly obscene. They were not selected because they were hated. They were selected because they were available. The killer did not need history with them. He needed habit. He needed repetition. He needed the same blind second at the end of the same long night when routine narrows a man's attention until he stops seeing anything except the lock in front of him. That was the real pattern. Not identity, exposure, not motive, access. And once I understood that, the city changed shape for me, because it meant the next victim did not need to be marked by conflict or debt or revenge. He only needed to live predictably enough to be studied. And by then, somewhere else in the city, another man was already being watched in the dark, his habits already being learned, his final walk already being measured by someone patient enough to let him believe he was safe right up until the second he wasn't.
Thank you for watching this episode of Detective Geathers Case Stories. Please tune in for our next episode on this channel. Have a great night.